Testing. Yeah. I see one viewer. Two.
Charles. I am.
Did you install the Vagrant the guest plugin, which should be part of the install instructions? Okay, guys, we actually have viewers now.
Oh, cool. Okay, everyone shut up.
Okay. So I'm watching the chat on the Hangout. So if anybody has any questions, please put them there. I can see a few people connected now. So as I say, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. Just put that in here. I will try to keep this visible as often as possible. So the first part here is I sent around, and Nigel sent around, some instructions to download and install Vagrant and the Vagrant resources that I've put together for this workshop. And everybody in the room with me has said that they've been able to do that. Can somebody send me a message from the chat on the Hangout and say whether they've been able to? Now I wait. Okay, I'm just going to share the screen with the instructions and the link for it. If anyone is missing the instructions, they can get them here. They're in the chat now of the Hangout on Air. Note that the download link is actually only gettable through Confluence at the moment. I'll just pull out that link. If anyone wants to download it directly. So that's the full zip file. I'll give it a couple of minutes for people to download those, maybe confirm. So again, could somebody who's connected on the Hangout please go into the Hangout chat thing, which is the little thing on the toolbar on the left, and tell me that they can hear me.
You want to get people to join Lindsay's chat instead then they're all on it as well. I don't think they want to join the Hangout because we're
If anybody is having issues with the Hangout, please, if they can't use the chat, send me an email.
What, do you want a handle?
Yeah, if you want to know.
I can try it.
Okay.
Sure. So, probably not. Starts. And then the ones that caught any of the really
Right.
this one.
Is it simply you do that?
What's the best one? Well, I think this one before.
Okay, I've had confirmation that people can hear me, which is great. Right then. So let's get on with this. Anybody need a couple of minutes? Yep. Okay, I'm going to start with the presentation part of this now. Change the screen share so that we can actually see what's going on. I have no idea what not authorized means there. It's working for others, so far as I can see. Okay, yes, that looks to be working. All right. Okay, so this is an introduction to Chef. It's going to be fairly lightweight, with some simple tasks towards the end, which is why you all have hopefully access to a Vagrant box. We're going to cover a few, basically just what is Chef, why are we using it, and an overview of a very simple bit of configuration in it. So what is Chef? Chef is a configuration management tool. The company OpsCode has been around for something like, if I recall correctly, it's about 5 or 6 years. It's somewhat similar to another open source config management system called Puppet, which in many ways it's a reaction to, and it has open source and proprietary components. Now, not everyone may know particularly what a configuration management system is. Generally speaking, they are tools to apply and merge configuration to a number of devices in a consistent manner and, as it says on the slide, predictable, repeatable, maintainable, and automatable. Why Chef? Well, we need to change what we're doing at the moment. We have an existing config management system called Rubix. It is very powerful, but it's become increasingly difficult to add new things to it. It's very complicated. You find the same piece of configuration in multiple places. And frankly, there isn't a lot of good advice for how to add new things to it. There isn't a lot of documentation on it. So our existing configuration is in a bad state. And we are at a point where it is almost as much work to rebuild the config management that we do have as it would be to start a new config management system. So both of these things are huge amounts of work, but it is probably the best opportunity that we've had in quite a long time to actually do it now and to look at the sort of the milieu of config management systems that exist in the marketplace right now and pick something that works better for us for the future. We had a team evaluating various config management systems. I don't know if people have heard of people talking about Puppet and SaltStack. We almost ended up using SaltStack, but some scalability issues were confirmed. So we ended up looking at Chef now. Chef has a very nice configuration format. It's much easier to read than most systems that are competing with it. There's a lot of people using it, and it's very easy to support a distributed model, which is, we can say a developer can have control over the config of their products. The DBAs can have control over the config of databases. And we can take all of these people who have control over their own resources and then merge them into a production or stage or development config base and apply those to devices. It's pretty mature and scalable, and it has good Windows support, and there's several people here from the WinSys teams who've been using it for, what, over a year?
No, not long.
That's what James told me, sir.
Oh, he has.
Okay. Some people from the WinSys teams have been using it for over a year. So, what's in this workshop? As you can see, I'm going through reasonably quickly. There will be time for questions at the end, and there will also be some help with the workshop resources. So first up, there's multiple ways to run Chef. There's Chef Client, Chef Solo. Chef Solo is actually a bit outdated these days, but it's still perfectly good for this particular introduction. Chef Solo, if you've ever used Rubix with a C root, that's a configuration root, it's very much like that. You can upload a load of configuration to the device you want to manage and just say, go work from that. And it's exactly the same configuration as the Chef client, so it's exactly the same thing that we will eventually be deploying to devices out in the production estate. And so we'll give an overview of Chef configuration, quite light to start with, a demonstration of using it, and some exercises to help you get a better feel for it. So first up, Chef attributes. They are a hierarchical dictionary of keys and values. Every single time you run Chef, there is an attributes list in there somewhere. And that tells Chef what to do, where to do it, and how to configure each of the little bits and pieces. It can often be quite small, or when you're pulling in data from many different recipes, it can actually become much bigger. You've got an example here which is saying that Apache's log directory is varlog httpd. The MySQL root password is something random. You should install PHP via packages rather than trying to compile it. And there's a run list, which is what tells Chef what to do. So the Chef attributes always should contain a run list. Without it, Chef will complain that you haven't told it to do anything. So you can see here a run list which simply says install Apache 2 and install TMEU Chef Workshop. Everything in Chef is configured with attributes, cookbooks, recipes, and resources. A cookbook is a collection of some common attributes and one or more recipe. A recipe is a collection of attributes and one or more resource. And a Chef resource is a block very much like this that contains some text that tells Chef how to treat a particular thing. So you can see here we have a directory TMP folder. This example is actually taken from the Chef documentation. So it's telling you that this directory should be owned by root. It should have its group set to root. It should be mode 0755, which for non-Unix people is read, write, and execute by anybody by root, and read and execute by anybody else. And action create says if it doesn't exist, create it. Things can get a lot more complicated than that, but this is all the basic idea of how everything is configured in Chef. It's all going to come down to lots and lots of blocks like that with more or less complexity, and in most cases about this sort of level of complexity. So there's a huge library of built-in resources and plugins to provide more. If you end up looking at some of the code in the recipes from cookbooks included in the demo, you'll see that things like the Apache cookbook defines its own resources. Those are all encoded in Ruby. Most of the people who actually work with this will never need to really know much Ruby, just enough to understand these recipe files. In fact, the only really Ruby-ish bits of that are the do and end on the example resource here that say this is the start and end of a block. So, there's an attributes file, so you can see that we have a cookbook called TM Chef Demo, which a fair bit of the workshop is going to use, and it's setting the default values for items in the attributes JSON file. So if anyone's not seen, the lower part of this is almost the same thing in JSON, setting the TM Chef Demo MySQL password to something. JSON, if there's anybody on the conference who doesn't know that, is an interchange file that's used mostly originally for JavaScript, but now for just about anything. You can probably find some tutorials on it online, but it's pretty simple. You can see here you've got the curly brackets. Those say you've got a dictionary, which is a set of key value pairs. The first thing in there is, in double quotes, TM Chef Demo, and the colon says the bit to the left of it's a key, the bit to the right of it's the value, and in this case, the TM Chef Demo is a key pointing to another dictionary, hence the curly brackets, and the MySQL password key is set to something. It's not particularly complicated, I hope. Okay. So now a bit of a demo. Let's see. I'm going to now just switch over my Chef install.
It seems to lag somewhat when you watch from YouTube. It seems to lag a bit. I don't know if anyone else is having that. That's watching at the moment.
Hopefully not too bad.
Take a while.
Okay, yeah, that is seeming to lag a bit.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
oh, that's fine. It goes along with the audio.
Okay, good. So I'm just being told that the video is lagging a bit. So you're hearing me say this several minutes ago. So I am just now starting up my Vagrant box. Hopefully many of you have already done this. It'll take a couple of minutes for mine to set up. So let's just talk people through. Vagrant here is a tool for making, well, it's like a config management tool for virtual machines. You can specify the entire config of a virtual machine in a single file, quite small, that says, in this case, let's just move this so that everybody else in the room can see it. Should be readable. Okay, so Vagrant will create a VM based upon a box file, which is like a pristine image. It will then make the changes to it that you've specified in the Vagrant file, in this case installing Ruby and Chef and a couple of other things, and it will run provisioning software on it, in this case an empty config of Chef. We'll just give that a minute. Okay, everybody else who's watching this,
Does Chef
Nigel.
Does Chef not usually install with its own Ruby distribution inside?
So that was a question, if Chef installs with its own Ruby distribution. That depends on when it's being installed. I believe it would do so on Windows. It's using the system Ruby on this Ubuntu VM.
Possibly a packaging consideration? I think
Yeah.
like Ubuntu might have chosen to package it with the system ruby.
More than likely, yes.
Down there,
Even by
yeah.
checks, was come to the table.
Yeah, because one problem I've had for Puppet is it's needed an older version than I've needed on system, and it's still a pain. And I saw that as an advantage to Chef, that it distributes with a built-in Ruby as well.
Okay. So the Vagrant is finished build coming up, and now I'm going to use Vagrant SSH. Should be the last command on everybody's install instructions, which will get me in. So now I have a prompt on the Vagrant box. And the last thing actually in the install instructions was
Oh, put your web browser.
yep,
So your web browser doesn't use it, but
point your web browser at something that doesn't exist as yet. So okay, so everyone should be able to see by now the Vagrant SSH prompt. And the first thing I'm going to do is just show you where all the resources are. So if we look into /tmp Vagrant Chef 3, this is where Vagrant automatically installs a link to the outside version of all of the resources that you include with it. So if you want to see these files in a file browser, if you find the location you put your Chef Workshop demo and look inside a directory Chef resources inside that, you'll be able to browse around. That's where I can see it. So Chef Workshop. So we can see here there's Chef resources, cookbooks, and there's loads of things in there which people can look at. Okay, within this folder we have Chef Solo 1, 2, and 3. Chef Solo 1 is the inside the VM copy of all of the cookbooks. And there's all the cookbooks that are pulled in by this particular workshop. But the only file that we care about right this second is their dna.json. And I'm going to use Nano for this because not everybody actually knows how to use Vi. So when I mistype this several times, you understand that it's because I'm using muscle memory that doesn't exist for this editor. So you can see here we have a single thing in the run list, which is TM Chef demo, and we need to add something to that. You can see that our web page doesn't work, so we're going to need to install Apache. That's pretty easy. Put a comma at the end of that line and say.
Where's that file again, Charles?
That is, I'm being asked where the file is. I'll just write that temporarily, and it is /tmp /vagrant-chef-3.
might be a different number.
I've just got three directories that have those files. So.
Okay, some people have not seen that.
Mine didn't land either, actually.
Yours?
I couldn't land the Vagrant.
Okay.
Nothing.
So if anyone wasn't able to mount the Vagrant host mapping, then that might, yeah, that's probably going to be empty directories, which is annoying.
Have a look at. Have you got anything in there?
Yeah, that's
I got an error saying I couldn't mount, and it said the protocol was supported, so I don't.
Control X.
First time I did it, wipe it out. Yeah, obviously the three addresses.
Okay. So I'm going to have to just,
I think you just carry on.
well, yeah,
Yeah, just-
I'm going to have to carry on with this one. Yeah, I will. Okay, so we can see we've got nano DNA.json, and I add recipe Apache2 in square brackets there. And if I Control X, save that, and yes. And just pause a second so people can see the content of that, so they can make it the change on their own.
Did you explain why there's a comma on one of them lines and not on the other one?
I didn't actually know. So the comma is there because the square bracket construct in JSON is a list. So you can see here, run list, colon, that's saying the key run list points to a list, open square brackets. And then every entry in that is something, you probably in double quotes, separated by commas.
It's a comma separated list.
Yes.
Don't do it like Perl.
That's
You can put a comma on the last one as well.
Yes, there can't be a comma on the last line. Okay, and I'm going to save that. So now we want to run Chef to update the
You
changes.
could observe at the moment that probably Apache's not running and nothing's listening on port 8.
We did that already.
Hopefully.
You just want the URL.
No, right, okay, true. True, but maybe for the people over there, that might be.
So at the moment we know that Apache isn't running. I will prove it in fact because I've been asked here. Nothing called HTTP. Nothing called Apache. No packages, which are obviously a web server. So to run Chef, we say sudo because this is going to run as the super user. Then chef-solo, and we pass it a piece of configuration, which is the solo.rb, which you can have a look at if you like. It's just telling Chef that it's getting its directories from this place. And -j, that's the JSON. So basically we're saying Chef solo as super user with config solo.rb and the attributes file dna.json. And if I run that now, you can see that's going off and installing packages.
I'm showing us the solo RB.
So give that a moment to install Apache. So what I will do for those who didn't have this working properly is while the workshop bits are on, I'll see if I can come around and fix those here. And if anybody is having issues, please email, and I will attempt, well, if they match any of the issues that I fix here, I'll send you a fix. So that's Apache working, and if we now go to our Apache pages, so you should see, instead of this web page is not available, if you reload, you will see you have Apache working. You do not have PHP working. You do not have MySQL working. And I'll just share that with the
Tell us something about why they're on different ports.
so there's a question about different ports. Could you explain the question?
So my understanding is that within the VM itself, actually being on port actually is expected to be outside of the VM.
Yes. So that's a question on why Apache is running on port 80, but we're looking at it on port 8080. That's a part of Vagrant actually. It is able to automatically set up port forwarding between the virtual machine and the real host. So I've previously configured it so that it can say port 8080 goes to port 80 on the VM. So we can see on there, just share the, so this is what you will see if you have this working, and if you reload your index.php file. So you can see that it's partially there, but not fully there. So let's go back to Vagrant and have a look at that. So we've now got Apache working, but we need to get PHP working. So there's a number of things to look at here. The key thing that I would do is I'd want to find what the packages, what the recipes are. So if we look inside Chef Solo 1 cookbooks, I'm doing it on the Vagrant box here because I'm familiar with the shell. If you actually look at your own local file systems and look in the directory you unpack the zip file to, all of these things will be in Chef resources/cookbooks. So if I say that, I can see we have cookbooks. I have a directory for Apache 2. So I look inside there, and I have a directory called recipes, which are all the recipes that it supports. And actually, we can see, I can see the mouse, mod PHP 5. Now there's a lot of these here. You can see when we wrote our run list, we just said recipe Apache 2. Now what that'll have done is it will have pulled in the default recipe, but we can say, I want to install the mod PHP 5 recipe from Apache 2. So to do that, I edit dna.json again and add onto the end of this line recipe Apache 2 : mod _ PHP 5, that being the name of the recipe that we just found. Right. Apache 2 is the name of the cookbook. So the first one here installs the default recipe from TM Chef demo. The second line in the run list installs the default recipe from Apache 2, and the third line will install the mod PHP 5 recipe from the Apache 2 cookbook. So I'll save that, and I'll rerun Chef. Again, this is just the same Chef Solo command, but because we've changed dna.json, it's now going to pull in more things. You'll see it's actually going to also run through everything that it did before, but not make any changes. You can see a lot of the screen here says skipped due to not if. Inside the Chef resources, you can add not if some condition, and in this case, it's actually detecting that it's already done that and nothing has changed. So it doesn't need to add anything new on this.
Quick question: what would have been the behaviour if you hadn't put Apache 2 in there and you just expected to install one?
So the question there is, what would have happened if I told it to install Apache 2 mod PHP and not included the Apache 2 recipe? That's going to depend a lot on the individual cookbooks. Many cookbooks will have dependencies set up so that if you had Apache 2 mod PHP, it would also install the default Apache 2 recipe. I haven't actually looked at that particular one. It is possible that it would simply fail due to not having resources there, that the default recipe would pull in. But you would get an error message. It's not necessarily implied, but in that case, you're basically trusting in the person who wrote the cookbook. As with many things, the quality of everything that goes on will depend upon the skills of the person who wrote the cookbooks. The benefits of using Chef are that there's a large community out there who are making changes all the time, and everything in the standard cookbooks are publicly developed. So anybody can go out and say, well, there's a problem here, I want to contribute this fix. So I had a question from over here a second. Okay, so it seems I've answered it. So we've now installed Apache and PHP 5. And if I just go back and reload the web page, it should say you have PHP working. We still don't have MySQL working though. And that's going to be the first thing in the workshop for you to do. Now, I am listening here. Send through emails if you're having any troubles. I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of information that will help and leave something on the screen that will hopefully provide some context. So, here's some information about generic cookbooks and recipes. So again, cookbooks contain recipes, attributes, and other items. Look at them in your file system. You can see here, this is my copy of the MySQL cookbook. You'll see attributes, lots of other files. For this workshop, we only care about attributes and recipes. Recipes are the recipes that can be installed. And there's a reminder that if you see cookbook name : recipe name, that's saying I want to install a file that will be cookbook / name of cookbook / recipes / recipe name. And if you add that to your run list, it will tell Chef to install that particular recipe. So, let's give people a few minutes to work on that. Your objective here is to get PHP and MySQL working. There's probably going to be some questions on that. I'll start sharing again. Sorry, I'll start sharing that. The general information. Okay, so in general, in order to solve this one, you're going to need to install the MySQL module for PHP. You're going to want to look inside the cookbooks that you've got and find the name of whatever MySQL module is for PHP. There is definitely a recipe for it. So if you look inside your own file systems at the cookbooks that are included in the zip file, you should be able to discover it. Once you've found the name of the PHP MySQL module, if you add that to your run list as recipe, open square bracket, name of cookbook, : name of recipe, close square bracket, then run Chef Solo, which hopefully you've been able to do by now. You'll see Chef go off and install the package and install support for MySQL into PHP. And I'm just going to have a quick look around and see if I can solve any of the problems at the workshop. If you have any problems and you're watching this Hangout, send through an email and I will take a look at it as soon as I'm back to this.
How do you run shifts? Is there a deck that we can go back? Yeah, minus C, then a config file for JSON
So
file.
sudo chef, and I'll put into the Hangout as well the
I destroyed the.
So I'm going to mute myself for a moment. Okay, hello everyone. So I found the issue that a couple of people had here. It seems that the Vagrant install didn't finish provisioning properly. If you exit Vagrant SSH and drop back to the prompt on your local system, and then type Vagrant space provision and hit enter, then that certainly fixed it for an issue over here. So if you don't have these solo.rb and dna.json files, that might fix it for you. And again, I'll just be checking email and any of the comments on the chat on the Hangout to see if anybody has any issues. Hi everyone. Just going to cover a couple of things again to make sure that people have a chance to do everything. So you have a set of recipes to include. I'm going to include the first couple of them again now. So in here we have our recipe and our DNA.json. There's 3 recipes in my one at the moment, which is Apache 2, Apache 2 : mod _ PHP 5, and the TM-Chef demo, which has, among other things, the index.php that you are hopefully looking at. So in there, we have Apache 2 mod PHP 5, and the way that we found that, in a way that I can actually show you, so I'll do it via the shell. Again, we're in /tmp vagrant chef 5, and if I look under Chef Solo 1, that's where all the cookbooks are. If I look inside the cookbooks, I can go to PHP, I can go to Apache 2, lots of files there. We only care about recipes and attributes, so we're going to recipes, and looking here, and there is a mod PHP 5. So the recipe that we want is Apache 2 : mod _ PHP 5. To install MySQL support for PHP, you do a similar thing. So if we go into PHP, we go into recipes, we look in here, and maybe there is something that mentions MySQL there. So, and again, that's part of the next step. You can look at these files on your local system as well, and things are getting quite loud in here, so I'm going to mute this. Okay, hello everyone. If anyone is still listening to me. Most people in here seem to have got most of the way through this now. I understand it's probably much harder via email. Also, when you're listening to the coffee machine in this room start its self-clean cycle. Oh, no, somebody wanted a coffee just as I started talking. Tut, tut, tut. Oh well. In the interest of getting some progress on this, I am going to go through the changes necessary in the file here just to demonstrate everything working. The video for this will be available to everyone afterwards, and I'll bunch it up with the emails that I've sent which contain some hints and information, and also with the presentation that you've seen. So just quickly to go through, I'll find the Hangout window again. It's all over the place here. Okay, so here's our Vagrant file, or our Vagrant box. We still have we still have our DNA.json, and my copy, of course, doesn't have all of the things that are necessary to make everything work. So adding those in. This is the problem with using editors that you're not used to. Okay, so the first thing, in this example we have Apache and PHP installed, but we don't currently have PHP MySQL support installed, which is module MySQL. We also need the MySQL server to be installed. That's all the recipes that we need, but...
Can I just stop you there a second?
Yep, sorry, I've got a question here.
Where does PHP itself come from?
So the question is, where does PHP itself come from? And that is automatically pulled in by the PHP module MySQL. So in response to the question earlier, some cookbooks will have proper dependencies set up so that you don't need to install it. Some of them do not. I believe that in all the official ones we're either including all the dependencies ourselves, in which case most people won't need to care, or we're writing things in so it will support that.
So if you pull in PHP recipe module MySQL, it also pulls in the default recipe in this case?
In this case, yes. Okay. So the final thing, in fact I'll just run this one first. Get all the recipes installed. So running the Chef Solo, that's now going to go off and install the PHP MySQL library and MySQL itself. And once it's done, most of the thing on the little web page that I set up will work, but not all. The missing part is a password. That's almost there. You can see here it's setting passwords to I like random passwords, which is a terrible one. But it's a decent one for a default, because if you see it, you know that you've done something wrong. And we're now installing the MySQL package. People here are not talking about some of the terrible passwords in use in this company at all.
Public YouTube.
Yeah, please don't do that.
So they have to change it.
Okay, so that's installed PHP and MySQL, and I will just pull over here and prove that it is working by going to the page and hitting refresh. Contain error access denied. So the issue here is that the code that runs this page tests to see if it can log into the database, and it hasn't been told how to do so yet. Now that's going to do the awful thing of logging in as root. But let's look at that. So again, if we look in on this list again, I'm looking at the local things inside the Vagrant box. You can find these under Chef Resources inside whatever directory you unpack the zip file to. Here we've got our cookbooks.
Is that a copy or a representation of?
The question is that a copy or a representation? When Vagrant mounts a VM, it actually mounts the external directories. So if you change anything in the cookbook files outside the VM and rerun Chef, it will pick up the changes. So we now have a really simple recipe here, and if we look in attributes, default, we can see it's telling it that the TM Chef demo connects to MySQL user root and password, host, local host, and password. You need to set something here. And as per the email I sent around a short while ago, there is an easy way to change that. I'm just going to use Vim on this one because it makes less issues for me typing. And so if I just add in here tm-chef-demo, because I'm overriding, pardon me, because I'm overriding the configuration for the TM Chef demo attributes list in the cookbook. I'm going to start a new dictionary, and then say I want to set the MySQL password to be I like random passwords, which is, as I say, a terrible password. And that will set the password for TM Chef demo to be I like random passwords, which will be included in the template which writes the little PHP website. And yes, I am told, and I did in fact miss a comma. It's a fleck of dirt on the screen that looks like one. Need to clean that. And so we rerun Chef Solo. And you can see that runs through very quickly. And if I reshare this web page and reload it, you can see everything is working. Now, that's the end of the workshop material. There are some additional things that you can look at if you have the time and space for it, which are, firstly, it is a terrible, terrible thing for this little PHP script to log in as root. If you can find out how to change that, that might be an interesting little thing to look at. The second one, if you want to play around with dropping files from Chef, is to look at how to add a password protection to the index.php. I will send around an email with some pointers on documentation to look at for both of those tasks if you choose to follow through. I have a question here.
So this is what adding stuff to Chef. What happens if you don't want MySQL and you decide you want Postgres?
So the question is, if you don't want MySQL, you want Postgres instead. For the model that we are going to use moving forward, we would actually just wipe the VM and start from scratch, because most of the time that's what we're doing these days anyway in the cloud. It's only in development that you're likely to make a change like that. And if we make it cheap enough to just spin up a new test VM, that would also be cheap in development.
Yeah, it's a classic problem with configuration management, isn't it? Removing things.
Yeah, so I asked about that after.
So you want to come a bit closer if you.
So I asked about that after Natalia and I here were trying to be clever and thinking that I like random root passwords was a rubbish password, so we changed it to a proper password. And then that failed because MySQL tried to put that in the grants file, and then it couldn't log in as root because it had previously set I like random root passwords as a root password.
Yes.
So the recipe didn't know how to change the root password. So I asked, like, how do we uninstall MySQL? And the answer was that you can't uninstall MySQL with Chef.
Well, you can, but the default cookbook that I have used for this does not include support for it.
So the simple case is that once you stop including the role in your run list, the recipe rather in your run list, it just stops caring whether MySQL is installed or not.
Yes.
The same as in Rubik's, when you create a file, but then you remove the file from the roll, it stops caring whether it exists or not. It doesn't remove the file. In contrast to certain things in Rubik's that we actually enforce, like the existence of cron jobs in etc. cron.d Rubik's, and the package lists are enforced in Rubik's. So you remove a package from the package list, and it will be uninstalled.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen here without some.
It doesn't happen by default. If we set up the means by which it happens, then yes. But to be honest, this is just an introduction workshop, just to give you an idea of what it's like working with chef recipes and cookbooks. For that sort of thing, so Craig will be over in a couple of weeks, and we can talk to him about it then. There's a load of good documentation that they've written over in the US, which I'll be including on the emails I send round after this finishes, along with all of the rest of the materials that we've looked at so far. And hopefully those will answer a lot of questions. Although I do believe that we are changing the way that we build things at the moment anyway.
Personally, that I don't. I don't like the conclusion. Just reprovision it, because we've got a lot of hardware. And
we do.
Clearly, I'll just use a hot topic for a point of reference, which is Dropbear. Let's say you'd accidentally installed the Dropbear package on a bunch of servers. We'd prefer not to have to reprovision them, just to uninstall the package.
So again, everything that we do with Rubik's can be done in Chef.
Yeah.
We just need to actually talk about what we need to do. Remember that we have a different use case to a lot of people in the US, so we'll be providing the dev work for a lot of that.
Also, what you did there, Andy, the problem you had is a valuable lesson, because the lesson from that is if you're using configuration management tool to manage, say, MySQL, don't try and make changes outside of that, because you'll end up in a pickle.
My problem was to iterate. We built it up iteratively, so we first added MySQL, and then we thought, actually, we need to configure MySQL, so that was the incompatible.
You should have configured it within the recipe rather than to yourself.
So I think that we're getting into an interesting discussion, which will probably the talk for everybody else isn't the place for. It is an interesting thing, though.
Just got a quick question.
Yep.
How did people end up in this mess? Because what I did was configure each one thing in turn. And then I realised that the password was incorrect. I changed it in the attributes file, reran Chef, and it works.
So the question here is, the question there was, how did people end up in the mess? And actually, what's happening here is that I've actually set this up to be deliberately bad in some ways, in order to give you something more to look at later. That's why it's logging as root. That's why we're using the default passwords, which are terrible. That giving you something that has a lot of stuff that you can fix if you wish to look at it further means that some people are going to go and look at that and say, well, this is broken, how do I fix it? It's not that they've ended up in a mess. They've actually done all the right things that you have as well. They just looked at it and said, well, how can I fix this thing that's also wrong?
I looked for a mess.
Right.
And you found the mess that I put there. So I think actually, I'll keep this open for another few minutes. If you have any questions, please email me or put them in the chat of the Hangout and let me know. And I will mute again now so that people in here can talk. And I think that's time enough for people to have emailed. If there are any more questions, please send through an email and I will reply, along with a list of links and things later. Shash, thank you very much for watching.
Cheers.